Alright guys, welcome back to round 3 of Monthly Cup 15. We have an exciting match coming up for you guys. XYZ versus Alvar. XYZ and Alvar have been two accomplished players in competitive Faeria in the past. XYZ making a splash. I think it was in early access, while Alvar came more into the scene when Faeria got released. But yeah, both players are quite accomplished in their placements in the Monthly Cup.
Yeah, like you mentioned, XYZ took home a third place finish back in the January finals, which would have been the last monthly cup before early access. And then Alvar, pretty much as soon as we came into 1.0 full release, fourth place finish back in April, and then a third place in July. So both these players looking to get back to that winning form since they haven't really been able to make that big of an impact since.
I think one thing with Alvar to note is he is a mono green specialist, I would say. He had a lot of success on ladder and in previous tournaments piloting mono green and playing it very effectively, and mono green has fallen out of the meta for quite some time until recently when red combat control took the tier 1 slot, and mono green is a good check for that archetype. So I feel that Alvar, if he can get mono green in his lineup, he becomes a much more powerful force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, and both of these players looks like they've had some good results over the course of the day. Of course, Alvar, like we mentioned when you were going through the brackets, has only lost one game, and that's against Mayhem and Teddy. Two very strong, two very consistent monthly cup performers. So I'm very intrigued by what he's bringing as his opening deck here.
Yeah, he's beaten two previous monthly cup champions. Both Mayhem and Teddy have been previous winners. Mayhem being a two-time monthly cup champion, so quite a feat already to start things off.
And there we have it. We're going to get into the game here. Both players are readied up with their opening decks. We shall see our quarterfinals match, XYZ versus Alvar. Both players with just the basic wells, something that you don't see too often, actually.
They're keeping it classy, keeping it clean for their tournament performances. Don't want any cosmetics interrupting them. No, there's some pretty sweet cosmetics, such as the Hakoa, the frog, the big frog with the orb in it. That's a little distracting sometimes. So when that's staring at you, then the other side of the board. So they're just keeping it clean.
Yeah, and we do see something that's becoming a matchup that we should just expect to see from players. It is the yellow tempo coming out from Alvar, the red combat control coming out from XYZ. A matchup that we've seen go both ways so far today.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing with red combat control, it is a very strong deck, but it's not unbeatable. There are definitely ways you can navigate around it. We saw S of Dawn using yellow tempo very effectively last game, so we know that if the yellow tempo pilot is good enough, he can like I said, navigate around some of the powerful options red control has.
Yeah, a good start coming out for both players here. Alvar getting this early Windstorm Charger is always very nice, and then comboing that with the Campfire from the Outland Rangers and then the extra movement from the Origin Fanatic is going to be really nice to give him some favorable trades in the early game, whereas XYZ getting this Axe Grinder is always huge for the red control player on turn 1.
And you can see that XYZ is taking the more aggressive route here, going for that double neutrals. Doesn't really need another mountain just yet, but this also sets up Explore Mountain onto the well spot for future Axe Grinders. So nice little aggressive line from him there, whereas, Alvar actually has some interesting lines of his own. He could just go desert or double neutral, collect off the well and wait a turn, and then on the follow-up turn, he has the potential to make an explosive play with that Kalim's training, those campfires, and the Origin Fanatic.
Yeah, he could use one of those this turn to clear the Axe Grinder. You're going to double collect off the right side and have all of these creatures onto the board, which does play into the AoE, so you have to keep that in the back of your mind as well, but it does allow you to clear the Axe Grinder this turn, or just play for the slow line like you mentioned and wait for next turn, which looks like that's what he's going to go for.
I'm going to set up an Outland Ranger preemptively here, maybe just respecting potential fire bombs. Speaking of AoE, Garadan picked up. Garadan can be played this turn. Explore into Mountain, put an aggressive 6/6 on the top right-hand well. That looks very tempting to me.
Yeah, it does look really tempting to go for. In this situation where it only clears the Outland Ranger and it does leave Windstorm Charger, which can trade up into Garridan in a position where it can still move across and kill that, I'm more leaning towards Ground Shaker and then just Flame Burst to clear off the Charger. Maybe that means you never have a situation where you can play Garridan, but I'm more leaning towards killing off the Charger when you're able to.
Yeah, I agree with that. Garridan is definitely an option. Unless he goes for an Interwell Garridan, making things a little more awkward. Oh, actually going to wait. I like this even better, because now he's making sure Garridan gets great value, regardless of what happens to this Ground Shaker.
It's going to be awkward because that means next turn is possibly +1 into Garridan, and there aren't great mountain spots for Garridan right now. Like you said, you don't generally want that in between the wells. You'd like it another space out so it can actually use its charge 2 into impactful positions, but yeah, that definitely looks like that's what XYZ is setting up to go for Garridan next turn when it'll get that much more value.
It's interesting because I actually would have preferred the aggressive, straight up land placement from XYZ, because even if I know it kind of, you make the Charger have better range go into the Ground Shaker, it does stop a collection, and I think that's pretty important. Oh,
yeah, and this is
in.
really big from Alvar. 11 damage swing this turn. And actually playing around Garridan now. XYZ cannot go for the +1 Garridan because he doesn't have a land for the Axe Grinder to then clean up this Charger, and he could just die next turn if that's the play he goes for.
Yeah, it looks like it's probably going to have to be Flameburst Ciphers, or just make a land, move Axe Grinder, hit Cypher's Raft, and then move the Ground Shaker down out of reach of that Fanatic in the middle. So I think that's probably what I'd consider right now. You lose your Axe Grinder, but you have a double collector, and then you can still potentially get that Garridan value come the next turn.
Yeah, in this type of situation, I just don't think you can leave a Windstorm Charger alive right in front of your orb where 2 events represents killing you next turn. It's a position where red has all of the tools to deal with these yellow creatures if you do it in the right way. So you have to stop this right now before it gets rolling any worse.
I mean, you could Flameburst Cypher's Raft, but I feel that's 2 cards which you don't need to necessarily invest, and those cards will become much more useful after a Garridan comes down, where there's maybe another Outland Ranger or another Fanatic, or you might have to clear a future Windstorm Charger, another one with Flameburst Ciphers. So I think just using these Ciphers here is fine, and it does set up for a nice Garridan going into the following turn.
Yeah, and something else with that as well, your Axe Grinder didn't need to survive there. If your Ground Shaker doesn't exist, then you need that Axe Grinder to survive to be your collection or double collection going into the next turn, and then you can lean more towards the Flameburst Cypher's Wrath onto that 5/5 Charger. But in that situation, it seems so easy to clear because you don't need the Axe Grinder anymore, because the Ground Shaker is just uncontested over here.
Yeah, there's not really much going on for Alva in response to this Garridan. I mean, the Charger is nice. It's going to be able to... it can actually die as well if he goes for +1 on top of this Garridan for the Flameburst and just go for a massive board clear. But then again, I guess you have to figure out, do you even care at this point if the Charger clears Garridan or Ground Shaker? Because it's the last creature.
3, 5, 7, 9. You're still on a 3-event clock with this Charger right now, and I mean, we can see Alvar's hand, but if he draws a Flash Wind, that's lethal next turn. So I think you still have to respect that is a possibility. Now, you've already seen a train, you've seen these campfires, maybe you're thinking that you're a little safer than you might be, and then you lean more towards going for that +1 Garridan and the Flameburst to clear off everything on the board. I think that I like going for the clear better because it puts you in such a commanding position. Even if Alvar draws a Last Nightmare and he plays it onto Garridan, your Ground Shaker still survives in the double collection spot. And if he kills Ground Shaker instead, your Garridan survives. So I think I like the full clear better.
Yeah, I agree. Now that you put it that way, yeah, the Flash Wind is incredibly dangerous with that Kaleem's Train in hand for Alvar. Now, he's already seen a Kaleem's Train So he could say, well, I'll take a risk, but I don't feel there's any need to take a risk at this point. Garadan and Groundshaker both are going to remain on board after this exchange, and it's going to put XYZ in a very, very good position.
Yeah, and that is what he's going towards. Flameburst does come down. Again, Garridan comes down in a bit of an awkward spot, but it just doesn't really matter. And a Shifting Tide picked up. Very interesting splash in this deck.
That cheeky Shifting Tide in yellow tempo. Maybe this has been the secret to Alvar's victory so far. They didn't play around the Shifting Tide, and the Shifting Tide set lethal.
It also leads me to maybe think there's flash wins in one of his other decks, possibly. I don't know what that would be, because something like a red-yellow burn, you would still run Kaleem's Training in that as well. But, maybe it's that he's running something of a yellow rush, and he's running the flash wins in that. So I'm very interested what the Shifting Tide is in there, specifically aimed towards.
Just maybe an additional mobility trick to navigate around defensive lands, or move defensive lands out the way so chargers can get in and deal that damage. Maybe this is more all in on a charger kind of swing, kind of 2-turn kill play. But we'll have to see. We'll see how it is applied in this match. Fnatic probably just going to come down as a double collector here and pray that the red player doesn't pick up any removal.
We do see, this Grimguard is probably going to be pretty good for XYZ. Just if he ever thinks that he's under pressure, he can put that right in front of his own orb and have that taunt for if he thinks Alvar's going to have a big swing turn. But right now, he probably needs to just maybe underground boss aggressively and start pushing for some damage towards the opponent. Really flip the way that this game has gone right now.
I think Garadan needs to go up. Regardless of what you decide, Garadan needs to be doing something. He even moves to the middle so he can collect off the well. So maybe just in front of the orb so he can collect at the left-hand well. But I feel that's I kind of feel that's underutilizing Garadan, especially a big 6/6 like him. So I'd prefer him to go up. But the follow-up play, like you say, could just get that boss down, start applying some pressure. It looks like double neutrals is coming down, so maybe setting up for a future Horsemaster on that Groundshaker to push some damage.
The other option could just be double neutraling from directly in front of his orb over to the left side and threaten that you have a bomb slinger. Even though you don't, you could pick one up. Maybe you force your opponent to not double collect with that Fnatic, but he's going to go for the aggressive line instead and just move Garridan across.
Very interesting shift to Garadan there. Guess he just wants to take care of this 3-2 tow ship picked up. So this makes a bit more sense with the Shifting Tide. Now, tow ship drags a land with it when it moves. It has dash 1 as well. And then you can Shifting Tide that land additionally to make even more mobility. So Shifting Tide in combination with that card actually offers a lot of movement around the board.
Yeah, very interesting there. That those are some choices that Alvar has gone for in more of a blue-yellow than just a standard yellow tempo. I wonder if that would be, the Shaitan Demons have been cut, something along those lines in this type of a deck, or if it's more of the removal has been cut to allow more of this movement.
Alvar has a clear on Garadan. It is potential with the Kaleem's Training and the Soul Drain, but the problem is you don't develop anything else. Now, the tow ship is actually quite threatening. He could play that lake. He could dash the tow ship into an aggressive position and then make the Garadan move back down, use the Soul Drain to pick it off. Or he could just... yes, it doesn't go for the dash then, just going to leave it there. And it actually offers XYZ a collection on the top left well.
Yeah, that top left collection, though, is a little awkward for XYZ if he goes for moving Garridan in there and clearing the Fnatic instead, because then this 5/5 survives, and your opponent has all of these movement tricks. Now, the tow ship isn't going to get the extra power-ups that something like a charger would. So maybe you think that you're, again, a little bit safer, but the fact that it is yellow, do you ever think that you're low enough that a Wind Soldier is going to finish the game? It's just... XYZ, I don't think it can afford to be greedy in these situations.
Yeah, I agree with you. He needs to be a bit more defensive. Just respect any creature that comes down of any kind of reasonable threat. A 5/5 with mobility could push 5 damage, and that shifting tide could stop the Grimguard from setting up any defense. We've seen one mobility trick in the Fnatic. We know there's a shifting tide in hand, but there could be flash wins, like you said. So I think you just clear this 5-5. You don't get collection on the left-hand side, and maybe just develop an Axe Grinder in front of his orb and move the Ground Shaker up.
Yeah, the Axe Grinder at this point I don't think needs its +1 buff in a way that you would then delay your Ground Shaker hitting the orb. So I do like going for this. We're going to go for the boss instead. That sets up really nicely with the Gift of Steel as well.
Oh, and using the Garadan as a bit of a blocker here. So the Grimguard does have use as a defensive creature. It will taunt up something, but I don't think it was in a position without building lands to the center where it was that viable. So collecting Faeria here, developing the boss, sets up more economy for future turns, giving XYZ more flexibility to draw cards off the power wheel and use them with that additional Faeria.
I mean, now we could see that Shifting Tide used in a really nice way. Alvar could push damage with this Fnatic, develop another land, and then Shifting Tide the Fnatic to the orb. Even with that Kaleem's Training deals 4 damage this turn, Soul Drain clear off Garridan. Maybe it's a situation where you can win that race with another Campfire if he's still playing 3 Outland Rangers, another Training maybe. It's so close for Alvar right now of just being able to end the game at some point here.
Crystal Flower. I mean, Crystal Flower doesn't have a safe spot to come down. That's kind of the issue here. You wouldn't mind potentially just flowering the boss to stop economy game, flowering on the Ground Shake and stop damage. I guess he could play on the lake now. The Soul Drain does create some breathing room for this Crystal Flower. What would you flower, the Ground Shaker or the boss?
I think the boss, but maybe it's the Ground Shaker because it collects. But I think I flower the boss just because it has the bigger Gift of Steel. In that situation, if the Ground Shaker survives and it steps up to where the boss currently is, it still only has 6 life. So something like the Fnatic, if you're running Wind Soldiers, they can clear it, versus the boss, which is going to go to 8 life here.
So the boss with the Gift of Steel is very, very dangerous. It's going to push 6 damage, going to build up additional Faeria. Grimguard can move back now into a more defensive position. Can even set up an Axe Grinder on the well if he wants to invest a mountain. May potentially go for the draw to find a Cypher's Wrath. That would be very handy.
There's a lot of things that XYZ can go for here. I think the Gift of Steel and just Axe Grinder is fine. So maybe you go for the extra Faeria, but what are you looking to play then next turn? So, why not go for the draw type of situation? It's also kind of, do you play more lands in front of your own orb to set up a Bomb Slinger if you think that you need that later on? So there is the Gift of Steel. We should see the Axe Grinder follow up just because he has the Faeria as well, so...
Yeah, it doesn't value the +1/+1, and we were talking about earlier how the land in front of the orb is just so much better for Grimguard to defend. He's now taken that land preemptively, ready to move Grimguard into that spot in case anything really threatening comes down.
Alvar picks up another Charger. Could be really nice to get a combo play down, especially if he goes in like the bottom corner. And there is the Wind Soldier. This is still really awkward. I don't see a way Alvar can still really clear all of these creatures in a good enough way.
I kind of felt like a desert was needed there in the bottom left-hand corner into a Charger, and then set up some Shifting Tide shenanigans to help find a lethal next and just kind of take your medicine here. If your opponent top decks Flame Burst, they're going to win anyway. But if they don't, and they can't kill you on that turn, potentially you could win with a charge on the follow-up with these trainings, with this mobility.
Now, there is still a way that Alvar can do that. He can jump the Fnatic down onto the lake and set the Charger up on the desert in between the wells. That possibly sets up a Shifting Tide play next turn to have the game-winning lethal. But it is, again, if your opponent draws Flame Burst, you're going to lose, I think, no matter which way you do it. because it's either going to clear a creature or it's going to be like if you went for a creature clear, it would be lethal.
Oh, and there's lethal anyway. This is going to be the Gift of Steel. Going to set XYZ 1-0 ahead. Red Control definitely having a lot of influence in this metagame in the Monthly Cup 15. But we did see it get defeated. It's not unbeatable. So let's see if Alvar has that delicious mono green lined up like I predicted.
Yeah, I think there was a couple situations there where Alvar maybe could have gone just for the all-in play with the Fnatic and the Kaleem's trainings and just gone for the aggressive, especially seeing him pick up that Wind Soldier later on. He could have set up a situation where he found lethal through that. But really nicely played by XYZ. He played into a lot of options. It was really nice play of getting the Garridan down in the right way and just waiting for the right spots. And we do see Alvar go for that mono green, like you said.
Yep, very good counter pick to Red Control right now. We'll see how Alvar plays it differently to Moon, because Moon, you know, he took that Grove Caller Verdant Force orb line, which inevitably cost him the match because he wasn't back at his orb with a powerful threat to defend. So I think Alvar's going to play a lot more conservative in this game.
Yeah, and we do see Alvar with the Grove Guardian, something that kind of shifts in and out of the green here, depending on whether you think you need more taunts, whether you think you need something like Verdant Force for the bigger creatures. So it is something that XYZ can exploit in this type of matchup. You get your Ground Shaker, and then something like Brigand, Gift of Steel, or Cypher can really get snowballing against something like the Grove Guardian there.
And Grove Guardian's such a solid creature. It has Taunt, which is a big deal in some matchups, like the Rush matchup. But as a 5/6, you know, it's in that sweet spot at 5/6 Faeria, you know, where Ground Shaker has always been very powerful because of its stat line, Cypher as well. So a Grove Guardian making a return here is going to be a really solid option for clearing potential bosses without Gift of Steels. It can kill Grimguards, it can kill Axe Grinders, so there's a lot it can take care of.
Yeah, and really nice opening by Alvar here. He continues to commit to the left that he set up on turn 1. Wood Elemental is going to be really safe onto the far side, and then sets up all the forests to switch back, play either the Grove Guardian next turn, or just set up a Grove Caller line eventually in the future.
And like I said about that Wood Elemental, it's going to take a bit of investment to get rid of it. If there's no Firebombs in the list, you're going to have to develop lands towards it. It's going to take a Ground Shaker Flame Burst or a double Ciphers. And Alvar's fine with that. Like, this Wood Elemental is doing its job. It's just sitting back and it's collecting. And any Faeria or cards that get invested into it is fine for Alvar, because he'll just replay another creature, like a Willow. And that's even more difficult to deal with.
Yeah, and this is kind of a matchup where you really have to read into what your opponent has, especially for the red player. You have these Gift of Steels that you really want to play in a lot of situations to get extra value, but you don't want to play them in certain situations if you think your opponent has something like a Voice of Truth. So here we can see XYZ in something like that last matchup against the yellow. You generally would go for the Gift of Steel first. But here, you don't want to just lose that value of a Voice of Truth clearing that, so doesn't go for it.
I really like the double neutral here. Just making sure that, you know, he can't get any aggressive mountains on the right-hand side. And what I'd like to do with mono green, since Oversky, and this is with the Tree of Life version I was running before it got nerfed, you basically set up a defensive perimeter on whatever side your opponent's pushing on, and then you start to build lands into the opposite side of the well. So I wouldn't be surprised if Alvar, if he gets a bit of breathing room, he'll start to develop lands into that double collection spot for the Wood Elemental and just snowball his economy.
Yeah, it'll be really strong, and because of how impactful that can be, we see XYZ using that double Cypher's Wrath here.
Yep, definitely respecting the fact that if that Wood Elemental goes walkies, it's going to develop a lot of Faeria. But Alvar is probably pretty happy with 2 Cypher's Wraths going on that Wood Elemental, because those Cypher's Wraths can be quite important when trying to finish off green creatures that your creatures can't kill on their own.
Yeah, and we see this Verdant Force is going to be difficult for XYZ to deal with. It's going to require all of these creatures currently, unless something else is picked up. And if Alvar goes for Grove Guardian in between all of these creatures, that's something else where you need that extra little something to deal with that, whether it's a Ground Shaker, whether it's those Cypher's Wrath that were just used. So it's pretty big having those invested onto something like the Wood Elemental at this stage.
Are we going to see a power-up on the Vision Force here? Yes, just putting it right out of range there. Now, Gift of Steel does allow the Brigand and the Axe Grinder to finish it off, but you're going to lose all the creatures, and that is something XYZ doesn't want to do.
Alvar actually played around a great top deck there from XYZ. If he had played the Grove Guardian in more of the line that I was suggesting in between all of these creatures, the Gift of Steel and the Ground Shaker would have been perfect to clear it off with the Brigand there.
Cypher's Wrath picked up, that is the last one, so because he went for the draw, he can't develop the lands now to line up that Cypher's Wrath, and then he could have played a Ground Shaker, which would take the Grove Guardian, wrong one, down to a 5/5, which then could challenge it, but unfortunately didn't find that Cypher's Wrath earlier, and now things are looking very clunky.
Yeah, really awkward to go for the draw instead of the land there. It's just... Is there enough Faeria here? Goes to 8, so Ground Shaker Cypher's Wrath will be very nice.
Oh yeah, this isn't bad.
Yeah, this is where we always talk about that extra Faeria collection of these combat creatures. XYZ, just if they were flat, no text creatures of those same stat line, would not have as much of an impact as they currently are with that combat.
The thing is, I think that line might be kind of one of the turning points for this match for XYZ, because if he builds more momentum from this, if he was to pick up Horsemaster, things could be quite a bit of a problem. But actually, Grove Caller coming down, going to clear out this Axe Grinder, develop an additional Faeria collection, and then see if XYZ has another Ground Shaker, which he doesn't currently. Oh, but he drew it. Oh man, that's
the order of draws there. If he had drawn that in the other order, it's simply step down +1 Faeria. Now it doesn't, mean as much in this type of a matchup, because the Ground Shaker clearing, surviving as a 5/1, generally green doesn't have a good way to deal with that, unless it's running some Emperor's Command or maybe even the Deepwood Stalker just to deal that 2 damage. But kind of as I say that, Grove Caller is a pretty good pickup to move the other Grove Caller across if he wants to.
And picked up the Living Willow as well to go with that Feed the Forest. Could just use the Willow as a way to soak up the rest of that Ground Shaker, but that additional Faeria and card draw is going to be incredibly valuable. Grove Caller, the other Grove Caller over the other side, take care of that Ground Shaker, stopping double collection next turn, and could even set up a Wood Elemental with an aggressive land. I like this.
Yeah, no, having just played 2 Grove Callers, it's not as important to get that aggressive forest down for your eventual other Grove Caller lines, but it does represent getting you a really good spot for something like a Verdurm Force, something like a Therian Golem. Once you have one of these bigger creatures picked up, that's going to be a big positional forest for Alvar to have.
I know Verdurm Force is coming down in that slot are going to be very problematic for XYZ to deal with. He could play the Ground Shaker on the top right, but could be a little afraid of double power up. Double power up would be very deadly, allowing that Wood Elemental to clear the Ground Shaker and live to tell the tale if they were Elderwood Embraces. So how do you go about this? Do you maybe play the Ground Shaker in a safer spot on the mountain on the bottom right well?
I think just the fact that your opponent only has 1 creature in hand and they've been playing these smaller creatures, I'm more inclined to feel safer about it and play the Ground Shaker in between the wells. But it is something where even if XYZ goes for the defensive play with the Ground Shaker, you then work towards Garrison in 2 turns and you just play safe. I don't necessarily think that he needs to. I think I would feel pretty safe about going between the wells.
Looks like he is going to respect any potential power-ups. Tephra picked up from Alvar. That is a card we haven't seen in quite some time.
Yeah, that's going to be pretty big if Alvar can get it down. It's not only going to give him the big 6/6 body of Tephra, but the 5/5 buff onto something else will allow him a really big clear. He's in a position where he could play it. Would be one Faeria off to play it right now, but it's just not in a position that you need to play it. You want to when you have the ability to take that trade right away.
I kind of like double neutral going right below the 2/3 Grove Caller on the left, then into an aggressive Forest on the bottom hand well, into an 11/11 Tephra. I don't know how Red deals with that. And I think we've had situations in the past in this matchup before the Oversky where players have not gone for 11/11 Tephras. And I think it's just such a powerful option against Mono Red. They don't have an answer to it unless they run Flowers, and Mono Red in its current form just doesn't play them.
Yeah, the red list is very refined at this stage where it doesn't have a lot of maneuverability between cards that you can sub in and out for those tech choices. So yeah, the 11/11 Tether would be very difficult for Red to deal with. I just don't think Alvar's in a quite close enough situation where he can play it. I guess going for the 2-turn play would have been very nice, but playing it on the right when you know that your opponent is not going to be able to deal with those creatures anyway does look just as strong.
Yeah, Veteran Force is quite a problem here, especially now all Cypher's Wraths have been used. So if Groundshaker, say, comboed Horsemaster into Flame Burst, it's so inefficient. You lose that 1 damage, you have another resource from your hand, which Red likes to use for going to the Orb for the finishing their games, being used to clear big creatures when there's plenty more coming from Alvar. Mono Green is infamous for its wealth of massive, massive creatures. And now we have another Grove Caller, the third of the pack, that could teleport the Verdant Force down. It could collect a Faeria off the right-hand side. And then, oh, wow. And then he has potential, going into the Voice of Truth. I guess the one thing to consider now is, do you play around AoE? Do you just leave it here and just pass again?
Well, I mean, the fact that your opponent didn't play anything where they're going into a guaranteed Garridan turn, looks pretty bad. But in this situation, I mean, you can now feed your 2/4 Grove Caller, and you go up to 5 Faeria, and you can Voice of Truth on your Verdant Force. And that means it'll survive, and the Voice of Truth will survive the AoE here. So that looks really strong to reestablish just a creature surviving onto the board, as well as ensuring that your biggest creature survives as well.
I don't like the Voice of Truth position in there. I like this line. I think it's very clever to play around that Garridan. But I would have liked to seen it in the position next to the Grove Caller to set up collection once again. You gain an extra Faeria. Time of Legends is in hand, so you can Time of Legend into Runin and then set up Runin very quickly after. But now Garridan doesn't look as inviting as it did before this Voice of Truth came down.
Yeah, it almost seems like a position where Alvar was saying, I need this 1 extra damage. That sets him to 8. Any buff that he picks up is 10 and is a 2-turn lethal. Maybe that's where his mindset was more going towards than having the long game of Voice of Truth in an ensured collection position. But yeah, Garridan just doesn't do that much coming down. It does clear the 2 defensive collectors from Alvar, but any creature that Alvar picks up, he's just going to trade the Verdant Force into Garridan and reinforce with something else.
Yep, and that is going to be a Garridan to clear those collectors, but unfortunately it does meet its fate at the hands of the Verdant Force, and a Thorian Golem follow-up is also a potential line. A 5/10 is going to be an absolute nightmare for Mono Red to deal with.
Yeah, this is really the big swing of green versus mono red. Sometimes you can keep up with some of the other creatures that are on board, either through your combat Faeria gain or through the value you can get from Gift of Steel. But the 5/10 for 5 Faeria of the Therian Golem, the stats are just way too much for red to handle. And this is where we're going to see XYZ really push the advantage that he's built up.
I think XYZ needs to make a decision now. Does he continue to play this game out and get some more information? I mean, he could +1 into boss and play it into the double collection spot. That could actually give him a little bit of sustain, but you're never answering this Faeria Golem. This Faeria Golem is going to be very difficult to clear, and if you ever do pull the resources to take care of it, it's such an investment that Alvar is just going to have so many resources available. You can be able to play another one, and then you can't deal with the second one. So it's a tough position for XYZ to be in, and I wouldn't be surprised if a surrender came down right now. That Faeria Golem is kind of the nail in the coffin.
The big thing here is if XYZ goes for something like +1 and put the underground boss on the mountain in between the wells, that's where you can start to combo back into the game. But like you said, the Styrian Golem isn't going to be contested. That's 5 damage next turn. If he picks up another one, that's another 5 damage on that's represented on the following turn. Even feed the forest. Now you can hit the orb with the Styrian Golem, feed on it, and play Tethra. And then your Voice of Truth, which looks like it was going to get cleared by the Grimguard, is going to clear that, and you have 2 big creatures on board. So that would definitely signify the surrender there.
I'm actually pretty happy we're starting to see Tefra come back. Tefra's probably my favorite out of the dragons, personally. I don't know. I feel like the 5/5 power up is so flexible, especially if you can put on Tefra herself, and then she becomes this really unmanageable threat. Wow, it goes this. That's such a passive line. He has such a great Tefra opening there. I guess he just wants Runin instead.
I was gonna say I don't know if Ruin is even played in the deck. I guess that it would be, but I was thinking Time of Legends may have just been in the deck for Tethra.
I don't know. I would have definitely Tefra'd there. Like, you just accelerate your win. This is kind of delaying the inevitable. It's just making Alvar use more energy to win this match. It's all about that energy management.
And especially with the way that Runin dashed there as well, it really doesn't need to be a double collector at this stage. You just need to end the game, essentially. You're in a position where, really, if you let your opponent back into the game, they could have 1 creature swing to the orb and then a flame burst, or I guess double flame burst to end the game. It could be something that is a possibility, but a really nice wood elemental picked up there will block all those aggressive lands. So just XYZ doesn't have any good spots now.
What are the options? I mean, you could boss, can't even +1 gift. If you could boss +1 gift, that might have been a viable choice, and then you could Horse Master next turn. You don't get to the orb, but then you can develop an aggressive mountain. And if Alvar for some reason developed a land there, you would be able to hit the orb. But as just a 3/5, I wouldn't be too confident in it surviving, just because any power-up would just take it out.
Well, and even just the fact that Alvar has gone for those trades consistently over the past couple turns of just ensuring that XYZ doesn't have any creatures on board. Even playing the underground boss here, if he had played it, developed a mountain and played it right in the middle of the board, I still would have expected Alvar to step the Styrian Golem back and kill that, rather than going for the orb damage here. So
yeah, that looks like it's going to be it. Double neutral, crossing a path straight down the side there, allowing an aggressive forest being played on the left-hand well, and it's going to be very difficult to defend that. When an opponent can set up this double neutral play, when they're that comfortable, defending becomes so tricky.
Yeah, you have very limited lines. You'd have to play the mountain right on the well, which is going to be within range of Runin there, so it just doesn't leave you with any options. Looks like it is going to be Cypher coming down, and I still just don't see a way out for XYZ here. It's kind of just delaying the inevitable at this stage.
I feel like XYZ is just trying to get information, and I feel like Alvar's kind of giving it to him. And maybe there's a reason Alvar didn't play Tefra. Now, if Alvar plays Tefra, everything I'm saying now means nothing. But yeah, he's going to play it. I was going to say, maybe the reason Alvar didn't play do that Tefra line before that you suggested is he didn't want to reveal Tefra.
And of course, in the fashion that we should be expecting with the way this game has gone, Alvar goes for the clear instead of pushing 10 orb damage, but that will be the game going over to Alvar and takes the counter matchup, going to tie the series up at 1-1.
So red control now out for Alvar. He does have mono green remaining. XYZ. Oh no, sorry. XYZ has lost red control. Alvar has lost yellow tempo. So maybe XYZ's answer now is to line up his own yellow tempo and just try and outpace his opponent here. And it's actually going to be a mono green mirror. It's been a very long time since we've had this sort of matchup. Mono green did fall off during the Oversky expansion. It was being represented before Oversky, Runin being a very key factor in its success. But now we're going to have mono green mirror, and I'm no surprise that both players have brought mono green with them, with mono red being such a powerful option.
Yeah, a Verteran Force again off the start here for Alvar, even in this type of a matchup. Going to be very difficult to deal with.
Yep, Verteran Force coming down nice and early. 7-7, big body, going to take some beating to get it removed from the board.
Both players now with a Grove Collar as well. This is going to be very interesting, who can get the right trades.
And Alvar's setting up very nicely here. He has the first collector down. It's a threat that's going to be very difficult to clear. And XYZ gets to play his first creature next turn. And this double neutral is setting up potential Grove Collar lines in order to counter whatever collector comes down.
Yeah, and the early Willow feed combination in hand for Alvar. This is looking very strong position for him just because he was able to, 1, get that first creature down, 2, have the Grove Collar, and 3, reinforce the Faeria gain if he goes for that combination.
There are a lot of different lines here for XYZ. You could develop a defensive land from across the left side of his well to that, and then collect from there safely out of range. It looks like he's going to go for it with the Grove Guardian. This is one line. Another line was to play Runin more aggressively and just allow it to be soaked a few times so it builds up some power. Could have played a Verteran Force with an Elderwin Embrace. Lots of different decisions there, but I like this one.
Yeah, definitely getting Runin down into this position. Even if Runin dies once or twice, that's pretty much the game plan of having Runin down. You want her as quick as possible to get to that 6-6, 8-8, 10-10 position where it's very difficult for your opponent to deal with it.
So what's the line for Alvar here? Is a teleport even worth it to kill the Runin? And then you have to be cautious of your opponent's teleport. Grove Guardian could teleport to the other side, get a power up, maybe clear up the rest of the Verteran Force. So Alvar took an aggressive line. We'll see if he follows through with it.
It looks like he is still leaning towards the Grove Collar. I think feed the forest first so that you can see all of your options before you commit to one. Another Verteran Force would be nice. I actually wonder now if you go for just an aggressive Verteran instead of the Grove Collar, but I just don't think it's... I still think you've committed now to the Grove Collar play.
At the end of the day, XYZ still has to replay the Runin. So it looks like it's going to be the conga line of Verteran Forces just marching their way towards that Runin. There is an Elderwood Embrace, not going to be enough unfortunately, but +1, move the Runin back, and then move the Grove Guardian onto the neutral, teleport across into Elderwood Embrace, will clear one of these Verteran Forces.
Yeah, and it will set up a 7 attack creature that'll clear the second one as well. You're, I guess, in a position where you could just attack with Runin and replay her, but it just doesn't look like enough at this stage.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's worth it. If Runin was able to clear one of these creatures, then fine. If as a trade, you don't really mind, but in its current state, it, like I said, doesn't really feel like it's worth it. Are there any other options? I mean, you could develop the extra forest and then set Foreign Golem next turn.
Yeah, that's tough, especially when you're playing this mono green, which wants to get so land heavy towards Ethereum Golems. You want to play a forest every turn, or you at least want to have a wood elemental to accelerate those forests. So going for the +1 here feels bad because it delays your follow-up turns, but it looks so good right now.
The Grove Guardian line, I think, is a way to answer 2 Virgin Forces in a row. But like you said, you're not developing those forests. But wait, did he use the power wheel? Yes, he used +1.
Yes, went for the +1.
Okay, that's fair. And
so that's probably then +1, and then you have a guaranteed Runin again next turn, probably. But a little awkward here for XYZ. Very nice use of the dash there to play around the maximum value out of these Verdurm forces. Alvar in a position where, without a teleport, he'd have to use the 7-3 Verdurm force, not the 7-7. So, I mean, that is a nice mechanical play there, but it still looks worse than maybe one of the other options. But, I mean, this does allow your Ronin to come down as an 8-8 next turn, and maybe you snowball from there.
Emperor's Command is ready to check an 8-8 Runin, so that's something to consider as well if Alvar does want to apply pressure. I still feel that the Grove Caller line is absolutely fine here. I don't like the 7-3 going in. It just feels like a waste of resources. But then again, you could just teleport the Verdurm Force and get it right on that forest, in front of the orb. Push 7 and just continue to apply pressure. Runin is less relevant now.
Yeah, and even a teleport play isn't as good either. It's going to be only able to hit that taunt. You're going to deal 7 again next turn, and then if your opponent doesn't have another taunt, you possibly win the game in 2 turns. Looks like Alvar is just going for, I'm going to try to end the game as quick as possible.
10-10 Runin, very strong creature, but this pressure is quite heavy right now. There is also Grove Caller into the Elderwood Embrace. This will allow a clear on Alvar's Grove Guardian and put a taunt in the way of that Verdurm Force. I feel that's one of the better lines. I don't think you can allow these 2 creatures to go ham next turn. 1 Feed the Forest could be the end if you decide to position Grove Guardian to defend on the right hand side, and then you can just feed your way past the Verdurm Force to get lethal.
And does go for the movement first. Of course, had to for the forest that he had set up, but you would generally want to go for that anyway because you want your Grove Caller to survive onto the left side here.
Takes +1 instead of the forest to set up a Faeria Golem next turn. That's very interesting.
Yeah, a bit strange there from from XYZ going for the +1. Maybe you're looking for Verdurm Force, or maybe some way to get Runin and a Sagami Warrior next turn. It's, I mean, this Runin is 10-10. If XYZ can survive at the rate that this game is going, Runin is going to win the game, it looks like.
Yeah, Runin's going to carry this. It's a 10-10 right now. That's going to be very difficult to deal with. Once XYZ stabilizes, and Runin's probably going to be key in that stabilization, just being able to clear off all these big threats. But once that happens, Runin will get an opportunity to be played aggressively as a 12-12, and that could be big trouble for Alvar.
And Alvar going for the draw as well there, the way that we've been talking about XYZ not going for the forest to get to Therian Golem, Alvar doesn't go for it either, so it does mean next turn if he wants to, he'll have to make a forest for the Therian Golem, but at least for this turn, it looked like he could have developed that forest and then decided on the draw or +1 Faeria next turn.
So we see a Runin's Guidance coming down on the Verdurm Force. The only reason I would feel you would do this is 2. Actually, there's 2 reasons. It's Grove Caller, so Grove Caller can't trade off with the Grove Caller on board, but also Deepwood Stalker. So Deepwood Stalker is another consideration since this is XYZ playing mono green for the first time in this series.
Yeah, and you don't know what your opponent's running. If they're running some of those small stalkers as small removal coming out from green, I think the Grove Caller is probably the more likely that you're playing around, but really you never know. So it is a situation where you have to play around that there. XYZ now set up for possibly Runin +1 Sagami Warrior, but that doesn't stop 9 damage to the orb this turn. So we'll have to see if XYZ goes for something like a draw to try to find a taunt instead.
He's run a lot of cards and gained a lot of Faeria recently off the power wheel. We haven't seen that forest develop going towards that Faeria Golem. There hasn't really been time to establish that yet. And I feel you probably have to go for a draw again here. Just try and find a taunt. Worst case scenario, you don't find a taunt, and then you just play Runin, which can challenge the Verdant Force. And that is an interesting play. Oh, okay, taking the lands, that's fair. I thought it was going for a more aggressive placement. The Voice of Truth can chop this Runin down. The problem is it doesn't really do much.
Yeah, in this situation, I think you might be better off going for the Therian Golem here. Maybe even Grove Guardian, but you'd have to open up an awkward line. If you step the Verdant Force back and kill the Sagami Warrior, you can then play a Therian Golem or Grove Guardian to protect your Verdant Force, or at least to survive for the next turn. I don't know what the best line is. Alvar kind of went for the all-in here, and he just isn't getting rewarded with the buffs.
I mean, if you +1 into Grove Guardian on the right-hand side of the Verdant Force, it does lock out both the Sagami Warrior and the Runin, allowing you to push 9 damage this turn. Then the Grove Caller would need a power-up in order to kill the Verdant Force, but I think if that power-up does come down, you're in a miserable position from there. So I think your line might be correct. Just step back, clear the Sagami Warrior, and then just go into that Therian Golem.
It's just so awkward, again, if your opponent draws that Grove Caller. We've been talking about that as the thing that Alvar's been playing around, and if that is what comes out, then you lose to that. But swinging for the face here, looks like Alvar is going to, play for hoping he draws another Grove Caller here to end the game, rather than protecting his Verdant Force to win the game.
Just gonna pass, so allowing this Verdant Force to die. It's done its job, pushing that damage. And like I said, that additional Grove Caller from Alvar could set up a victory in the future. So some orb blocking might be required from XYZ. But that Breathing Room is quite nice. It could allow him to develop a forest in the center, start setting up that orb block. Or he could go for a feed on Runin, gain a lot of Faeria, use the 2 creatures, the smaller creatures, to clear the Verdant Force.
Yeah, that would be a very difficult Runin to deal with at 12/12 if he goes for the feed and just use the 2 smaller creatures here. That would gain 9 Faeria, putting him up to 12 or 13, I guess. So Verdant Force and Runin coming down as a follow-up would be really strong.
Willow is going to be a very nice answer defensively for those cheeky Grove Callers to find a lethal. So Willow, a very good pickup there, very durable taunter. It's going to give XYZ some space, some time to start developing his own offense or just reinforce his defenses. But Runin, I want to see her go aggressively now that Willow's been picked up.
Yeah, and the other thing there is he has the Sagami Warrior as well. Could even just Warrior and dash onto the most aggressive forest.
Oh, right.
Only gonna dash 1. Keep
right
going.
Up. Keep going. Yes,
there we go.
Very
so
nice.
There's the big swing from XYZ. He now has the defensive taunt creature to survive whatever Alvar plays, has an aggressive Runin, or a more aggressive moving Runin that should hopefully get an aggressive forest and combo into a Verdant Force next turn.
Time of Legends coming down. Let's see what gets picked up. Tephra instead of his own Runin. I think Alvar has a little bit of time here. Could just move back with the Grove Caller, pass the turn, and then go into the next turn, see where this Runin moves. Because once this Runin moves up 1 more tile, it does give him opportunities to play aggressive creatures.
I think there's possibly also a play where you could Therian Golem directly above the Living Willow, force Runin to step back and give you another turn. But at least for now, that's not something that you have to go for. Could, just like you're saying, step back 1 space, go for maybe a big Tephra next turn in an aggressive spot. But it's kind of a situation where Alvar could go for that aggressive Therian Golem if he wants to and force XYZ's hand instead of just the passive play.
Looks like it's going to be a more passive line here. Going to see where Runin goes first before making any real decisions. And the step back's actually quite nice because it it gives you an opportunity to collect next turn as well, and then decide the fate of the Sagami Grovecaller and where your forces are going to go. Are they going to go defense or are they going to go offense? So very nice pass there from Alvar.
Yeah, this I would be just expecting XYZ to step up and play a Verduran Force. You want to put your opponent in a position where you can try to win the game next turn. Whether that happens or not, we're kind of unsure on, but you want to be in an as aggressive position as possible because currently you are winning the game just by the current board state.
See, it's tough. I feel that XYZ has to be aggressive. He can't just sit back all game. He could wait for a Grovecaller, sure. That is something, but he actually goes for the defensive fire, and I think this is fine, simply because the Runin should carry the rest of the match for him. So setting up defenses around his orb is a sure way of stopping Alvar from doing any tricky teleports. But now, what does Alvar do? It's kind of an awkward situation with that Runin, and even Voice of Truth only gets you so far. It reduces its power for this turn, but next turn, it's going to be empowered again.
Yeah, and that's the big issue, is you have to kill... if you're going to use the Voice of Truth, you then have to kill Runin in a way that the next turn you can play around the fact that Runin's going to come back down. In this situation, it almost seems like you just go for a Ethereum Golem onto the bottom left well. That looks like that's what Alvar was setting up. Actually going to go for Tethra. Is it going to buff itself?
Yes. So buffing the Grovecaller there would have been really sad because Faeria Golem and Sagami Warrior, would be enough to clear the 6/6 Tethra. But now this Runin gets to move onto that forest and hit the Grovecaller in the top right, stopping collection there. Maybe develop another aggressive forest and play a Verduran Force, and then use the Willow and these creatures as blockers to stop the Tethra from finishing the game.
Yeah, I mean, these creatures are going to body block and then has the taunt of the Living Willow as well, so it's so many turns for Alvar to actually punch through these defenses right now. And XYZ, if he pushes Runin up another space, kill the Grovecaller, even play a Verduran Force or a Ethereum Golem this turn, just represent as much damage as possible while still having all of these defensive creatures, he still looks like he's in such a commanding position.
Yeah, and the Verduran Force would represent lethal with a power-up. So that's a nice thing to consider with playing the Verduran Force this turn. Like you said, there's so many creatures in the way. Tethra has a lot of work to do before he finishes a game, and I don't think Tethra is going to win a race against Runin at this point. So yeah, I just like aggro Verduran Force, clear the Grovecaller, start with a bit of Faeria, and then set up the defenses to block, and then try and set up lethal in the next 2 turns.
And that looks like that's the way XYZ is going to go. And even with a taunt that we can see that's in Alvar's hand, it's only going to delay one of these creatures from hitting, and that's going to allow probably Runin to punch through for 12 and set up a 2-turn lethal here. And Alvar just isn't going to have as much time to get through all of his opponent's creatures rather than XYZ getting through the defenses here. So this still, to me, looks like it's XYZ's game at this point. And that's really going to be solidified if he can find another taunt creature, or even something like a Runin's Guidance to heal, or Elderwood Embrace to buff to accelerate the damage that much quicker.
There's a lot of defensive options picked up by Alvar this turn. I mean, he has the option of double Willow if he just wants to negate all damage on the following turn. But I feel that Willow is probably going to be needed for economy. It's hard to say. So maybe you could just Voice of Truth this turn, just bring that Runin down and just limit as much damage as it can do. You can +1 into Willow as well, so that even makes things less painful. And it gives you time, but Tethra has still a lot of creatures to go through. These guys, there's Willow, and even potentially the Faeria Golem as a follow-up.
Interesting that the Willow comes down in the bottom corner there. I was actually thinking if you moved in the opposite, or if you place your creatures in the opposite way there of Voice of Truth directly above Runin, and then the Willow off to the right where the Voice of Truth currently is, that would then taunt Runin for 2 turns. And you're only looking at the Verduran Force here. I'm not sure what the purpose of moving the Willow down here is, unless it's just to taunt the Therian Golem, possibly. I'm just not sure what Alvar was going for there. If he's going to then kill off the Living Willow and then taunt the Therian Golem so it can't move in front of Tethra to body block.
That's exactly what he's going for. So Tethra is going to kill the Willow next turn. The Willow is going to block it. Then Therian Golem's going to move into the position where the Willow currently is, and then after the Willow gets cleared, the Therian Golem then just sits in front of the Tethra that buys him 2 turns. But Willow in this position allows it to move in a position where the Therian Golem won't be able to shimmy around and protect his orb. So another taunt is going to be demanded here if he's going to stop that line. Another Runin's Guidance would be pretty good. Oh, he finds the Willow, so it doesn't even matter in the end. What a draw there for XYZ.
Yeah, huge pickup there. Now, it could have been you just go for developing a forest and play the Verdant Forest or the Therian Golem in front of Tethra anyway. And now attacking this turn means the Therian Golem is going to be able to clear the Living Willow instead of just a simple movement in front. But, ooh, the heal's a very good pickup for Alvar here, though.
The issue is, how does Alvar win? The double Willow is too much defense. I don't feel like he can win from here, because now if he clears this Willow, Willow moves in and blocks for the next turn. Therian Golem finishes off the 1-2 Willow that belongs to Alvar, and then once Tethra clears the other Willow, I mean, there could be another taunt. Therian Golem can move into a more defensive position. It just seems like a very hard match for Alvar to win at this point.
Is there a way, I guess if he goes for the heal now, he goes up to 14, and then you're 2 buffs away from dead? And then if Alvar goes for either Therian Golem or Grove Guardian on the bottom left forest, that with a buff can represent killing off the Willow, and then Tethra hits the orb for lethal. You'd have to +1 and heal yourself with Runin's Guidance, and then you're hoping that your opponent doesn't have 2 buffs and hoping that you draw into a buff, I think, is the way that Alvar can go for the win here.
Yeah, or Therian Golem, either one, it doesn't matter. Like I said, trying to set up a power-up play on this creature to clear the Willow in order to allow the Tethra to hit the orb, but that Tethra is going to get swallowed up by that Crystal Flower, and that's probably going to be game.
Yeah, that's a big pickup there for XYZ. Another buff would have allowed him to have lethal this turn, but clearing off either of these creatures looks like it will be enough. And you definitely go for clearing Tethra with the Crystal Flower, just because it is the more damaged creature. Even if you go for Crystal Flower and heal yourself with Runin's Guidance, the Therian Golem can't do enough damage to end the game anymore. So that looks like a absolutely massive pickup for XYZ in order to close out this game.
And back to back now, XYZ has had 2 huge draws. The additional Willow to basically stump the Willow play from Alvar to block off that Therian Golem from defending. The second Willow allowed XYZ to set up 2 more defenses to stop this Tethra, but now the Crystal Flower draw as well is going to completely take Tethra out of the equation for 4 turns. And that's not enough time, unfortunately. Alvar is 1 turn away from losing the game now, and Crystal Flower is just going to be a massive swing here.
That is a bit of an awkward position coming through from the Flower to put it up there, but could have been in a very protected position in the bottom right corner. And there is the buff picked up from Alvar, so it was just in time for XYZ. The Crystal Flower sealing the game here, it looks like.
Yeah, the cards lined up for both players in the end, but XYZ was able to draw his cards first and take the match. So the mono-green mirror is now over. The slugfest of 2 big green creatures battling it out has been concluded. Alvar has now lost his mono-green and must go on to his last deck.
And unfortunately started with that yellow with the splash of blue tempo, so I'm expecting he's probably got red as his final, and that is not what you want to see. Going with the mono red into what we generally consider to be the counter in the big green creatures. So this is going to be very difficult for Alvar to come back in this series.
And it's going to be an issue as well because Flower exists in this build of mono green, so if any big bosses get developed in response to, say, a big green creature, so preemptive buffing is actually far more dangerous, and Alvar's going to know that. He's seen a Flower, so he knows that pre-buffing any combat creature with Gift of Steel is going to be quite a risk.
Yeah, and you either, play around something like Voice of Truth, which I actually don't think we saw any come out from XYZ. So you at least got that information that Crystal Flower is in the deck. Now, something with that as well is Alvar could then get a really nice combo play with something like a Bomb Slinger if it's in the right position and clear the Flower very efficiently. Something that we'll have to keep an eye on as the lands develop here for both players.
It looks like double neutral is being considered here by XYZ, which is absolutely fine. There's no Faeria Golems in hand, so you could go neutral, wood elemental, forest neutral into the wells, and then completely take control of the into wells. But it looks like XYZ is going for a more defensive line, a more controlling line, where you develop lands from either side of your orb and just collect off your own wells.
And a big thing for the way that this matchup develops, that we saw in the earlier matchup as well, is that the Faeria collection is so important. And yes, you have the extra from these combat creatures, but basically the first player who loses that Faeria collection really struggles to stay in the game. A lot of the powerhouse creatures from green are in that 5 and 6 Faeria spot, and a lot of the big swings from the red are either on 6 cost, something like Ground Shaker, or going into your Gift of Steel, or event combo plays. So a lot of Faeria is needed to make big swings, and that is where you need this collection. So something like getting that Wood Elemental in the bottom right corner from XYZ could be very important to keep him in the game.
Yeah, it was kind of similar in the previous matchup we've casted today, where if you can just stick a creature in the corner as a green player, red has to invest resources into clearing that, and it's usually not worth it. So the green creature generally stays there for the entire game and just harvests an additional Faeria every turn, and that does add up. And that is quite necessary in order for the green players to have enough Faeria to make these big swing turns you were talking about.
Yeah, and now a Verduran Force picked up as well. Not finding a buff here, so XYZ not able to clear that injured underground boss, but Verduran Force without any of those power-up tools from Alvar's deck, going to be difficult to deal with here.
He has the option to draw. I mean, I don't feel like any additional lands are required right now. And does take the draw in the end. Could feed the... Oh, I could feed the Wood Elemental on the right, but we've just discussed how important it is for mono green to establish that additional defensive collector to get the Faeria they need. So I think just moving to the right with the left side Wood Elemental and then playing a Grove Guardian in that spot to taunt up the underground boss could be the line.
Yeah, it seems so risky to go for this because you do get punished very hard by a Gift of Steel here. But in that position, I think the Feed the Forest would have been okay, not great, onto the Wood Elemental on the right. Because you gain 3 Faeria, you could just reinforce that creature with a Sagami Warrior. And it just wouldn't have really changed the board position. It's just this is the safer line. Feed the Forest you generally want onto like a Living Willow, Therian Golem later on for a bigger swing.
Luckily, no Gift of Steel found. Now, the Flame Burst is quite clean. It's going to be an easy clear here. But it is a Flame Burst invested. And Flame Burst is a very valuable resource, but what's really nice about this is the second Horsemaster coming down, zipping down, taking additional Faeria from that combat ability on that Wood Elemental. And now, this boss is in a position where it can hit face and get more value.
Yeah, really nice pickup there for Alvar. Would have been, again, really nice to be a Gift of Steel because his creature would have survived, but it actually would have been worse because the boss would have then been blocking the Horsemaster line to clear off the Wood Elemental as well, so ends up being a nice clear. A good position now for XYZ finding that Living Willow. He's going to be able to put down a couple creatures if he wants on this turn.
Yeah, the economy you gain from that Feed the Forest Willow combo is insane, allowing to push out more and more creatures. You're going to see the Warrior come down and the Faeria Golem. Now, the Faeria Golem is going to be the most durable defender on offer, and it's going to be tough to deal with. Very, very tough.
Alvar is sitting on a lot of Faeria here. Something like a Garridan could be played, but it just isn't a great position at this stage. Could reinforce his creatures with something like Axe Grinder, Underground Boss, but instead goes for the draw and just not finding that little bit of extra damage that he needs for all of these creatures.
Yeah, can't even develop Cypher, which is a bit sad, really. He did draw into it, so it wasn't even an option beforehand. I guess more Boss, more Brigands. Can't really go wrong with them, to be honest. It's just a positioning that's a problem. I think taking the Mountain on the neutral above the Boss was probably the better line, just to start recycling these creatures as damage and then gaining Faeria back from their combat ability.
I think even taking the inside the Wells position and getting an Axe Grinder there, because then it would have been a little safer from the Therian Golem. And then that combos you into playing Cypher in that more protected position as well. It could have been something Alvar could have gone for, but I mean, he's still sitting on so much Faeria. Once he does find those AoEs, he'll be able to make a big combo turn. But right now it's looking okay for XYZ to continue to put creatures on the board and actually stabilize from this position.
I like hitting into the Underground Boss here with the Faeria Golem, playing the Runin and dashing onto that neutral tile, and then shifting Sagami Warrior behind the Runin to be protected. And then you have a really sturdy bulk of creatures there to defend against this rush.
Yeah, and we saw how important that was last game, getting Runin down as early as possible, getting those power-up swings going, but not a line XYZ is going to go for here, and decides to pass for this turn and not even play something like a Verdurm Force down.
Yeah, being very conservative here. Must feel like he's so far ahead at this point that it doesn't really matter. It's just like, yeah, I've got so many good cards in hand to answer any threats that the Red's going to need to do a lot of work to punch through these defenses.
Alvar picks up another Axe Grinder here. Again, not getting the creatures that he probably wants or the events that he wants in this situation, just continuing to get more and more creatures. And I think there's a position where you really have to play a Mountain to get an Axe Grinder down, and that is what he goes for. It's just now you can't afford to draw and miss again.
So finally takes care of the Sagami Warrior, but this Faeria Golem is so healthy. It's gonna do a lot of work before it goes down, and the problem Alvar has, the more Faeria Golems that are drawn, the more difficult it's going to be for him to win this game, and Runin is going to represent a huge problem.
One of the big things right now as well is Alvar has already used 2 of his Horse Masters, and we haven't seen any Grove colors come out from XYZ. So as much as this matchup is very much creature focused, you have those movement abilities that are very impactful to swing games in one direction or another, and XYZ is going to draw into those more and more as the game goes. So that is something to keep in mind as well for both of these players. Of every play that they make has those movement options for one player and not the other.
Yeah, it's kind of about resource management, right? And Alvar has to be the aggressor, has to take the initiative, because as a red player, he's already in a bad matchup. So he needs to force XYZ's hand, make sure he doesn't have all these great defensive options or the Faeria to play them. But unfortunately for Alvar so far, it hasn't gone that way. XYZ has had fantastic defensive plays in order to stabilize and fend off this aggression. And as things get later into the game, like you said, these Grove Callers are going to allow XYZ to take the initiative and be aggressive with any creature he sets up defensively.
Alvar now finally picking up a Ground Shaker can start to get some of that AoE down, maybe put Cypher in a more protected position. But I mean, you're still looking at clearing Rune in a position where she's then going to come down as a 6/6, and XYZ just snowballs from there. So Alvar just looked so good on the early game with all the creatures that he had and couldn't snowball the advantage as hard as he should have been able to. And XYZ is now hitting that timing of starting to stabilize the game and having these bigger creatures on board.
So you can see the block coming down from Alvar respecting aggressive forests. I like this, but this is kind of counterproductive in a way because now Alvar is shift into the defender without any growth callers being needed. So now this is a great opportunity for XYZ to, well, he could do a lot of things here actually. He has Flower, so he can take care of Cypher right now. Just get out of the game for a few turns. Can move and play an aggressive forest if he collects off the top left well and play a Verdant Force. Lots of different options here.
It's actually a very cute play by Alvar here because he's putting Cypher in a protected position to then have Cypher kill Runen next turn instead of using something like the Horsemaster to kill it on this turn. And we saw how good Runen was able to snowball in the previous game from XYZ. If Cypher is able to kill Runen every single time, you can snowball just as hard with Cypher into that situation. So very interesting the way Alvar went for, again, this slow play. Instead of just going for a clear that turn and trying to get Cypher down.
I feel there was a good opportunity there for XYZ to move onto Collection on the left-hand side. He took the draw. I mean, did he have to feed the forest before the draw or after the draw?
I believe it was drawn last. It was draw into feed.
Okay. I was thinking, like, you could have moved up there, placed an aggressive forest, fed the Runin, and then replayed it as a 6/6. And then Cypher can't really do much about it.
Yeah, it could have been an option as well. And here XYZ just going for giving Cypher the trade, which is a little odd. Both of the other creatures can clear the Ethereum Golem here. It would be really nice to have picked up another Horsemaster and have Cypher clear the Ethereum Golem. And speaking of, there it is.
That is a lot of stats for Cypher. But there's a Crystal Flower to keep him in check. Maybe XYZ feels like, actually, I'll let Cypher do what he wants because by the time he's relevant, I'm just going to Crystal Flower him for 4 turns. But Flame Burst is a real threat at that point then.
And even just Bombslinger coming down, Groundshaker. I would have liked to have seen the Groundshaker held onto just because the flower was a possibility, but either way does come down there. And even though the flower could come down and capture Cypher, there's not a great position for the flower right now to be as defensive as you'd like it. You could put it down in the bottom right corner, but Alvar with these neutral tiles down the middle has enough reach to get maybe a Bombslinger over there, to get even just this Horsemaster over there and pop the flower that many turns earlier.
I feel that XYZ's last turn was very greedy, and he's kind of been punished for it now. I know he's already seen 2 Horsemasters, so he could be playing around the fact that, I've seen 2. The probability of the third one showing up is very slim. It did show up, and now Alvar is back in this match with that Cypher.
So there is a Grove color line possible for XYZ here of shifting the Warrior over and clearing, and then the Verdant Force could have cleared the Groundshaker there, but XYZ just going to play as many creatures on. I'm still very surprised he's not going for the Crystal Flower, but I guess now having seen all the movement, you can continue to play around possibilities of where Cypher can be with these smaller creatures, but it's just, you have to play it at some point here.
He definitely has an extra turn before Cypher is in a position where it can start eating up some of the bigger threats. I might like a shimmy from the Horsemaster to the right, play a mountain on the well spot, Bombslinger the 3/3, stopping collector from the collection from the right hand side, setting up your own collector, and a good axe grinder spots for the future. That seems really nice to me.
Yeah, that looks really nice. Again, plays to there being no real safe positions for Crystal Flower once it does come down to grab Cypher here. You would probably just continue to clear your opponent's creatures off the board.
Yeah, you can take care
That
of Runin.
looks like, yeah, even just taking out Runin here, yes, she's going to be an 8/8 when she comes down the next time, but that's another 5 Faeria from your opponent. That's pretty much their entire turn, especially once you're limiting collection in this way. So I don't mind this from Alvar of just continuing to clear all the creatures at this stage.
Oh, not clearing Runin. So making sure maybe saying like, oh, if XYZ doesn't have a good play this turn, I'm not going to give him one with an 8/8 Runin. That could be a reason why.
Yeah, definitely could be in that situation. Playing for where Runin's not going to die, at least at the present moment, could clear one of these creatures and then it's set up to die, but allowing your opponent to dictate the trades always feels a little awkward. But in this situation, maybe it is the way that you need to play it.
What does XYZ do now? It's very awkward. He's kind of opened himself up to being surrounded, and I don't think XYZ was in a position where he was losing. But now all of a sudden, I think the tides have changed. You know, this is all Alvar's in this game again.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if there's like a really good Grove color line where you can move something to a safer position here. Oh, it's so difficult in this spot for XYZ of what the best is going forward when he continues to draw some of these smaller creatures.
And no safe Crystal Flower spot is a huge influence on this match right now. Because if you could Crystal Flower the Cypher, you'd have that breathing room, that space, to be able to just keep developing your creatures quite safely. But Cypher is oppressing the spots of where XYZ can develop his creatures, and it's becoming a big problem.
Yeah, even in this situation, Cypher can now step over and hit Runin, and yes, he loses 2 life in that trade because she'll deal 6 and he'll only gain 4. But you then, clear both the creatures, clear both of your opponent's creatures on the more right-hand side of the board. Because the Bomb Slinger is going to die into the Living Willow, you can reinforce with an Underground Brigand and Gift of Steel it over on that side. And again, it looks very good for for Alvar to continue to put creatures onto the board, continue to clear his opponent's creatures, and limit all of the options.
I feel like XYZ's land placement is incredibly transparent as well. He's obviously setting up for some form of Grove Caller, because he committed neutrals in the early game to a Grove Caller line, and now he's gone for the same style of neutrals once again to make that commitment. So I feel that land blocking these neutrals, it would be really strong, but he's actually just going to apply pressure instead. So maybe instead of blocking lands, the game plan here now is to put enough creatures in an aggressive position that Grove Calling is no longer an option.
Yeah, and again, everything is so spread in the right ways that Crystal Flower, unless XYZ develops 2 neutral tiles up into the very top right corner, you just can't play the Crystal Flower in this situation. There's no good spot where it survives. So it is really nice play from Alvar. This is the all-in. This is dump your whole hand. What do you have that you can do against my forces? Because I don't think there's any way I can lose. Because now it's not even just Cypher. If the Crystal Flower comes down, he still has 8 damage possibly going to the orb this turn with 7 more potential on board. There's so many different threats now from Alvar, which he's been able to combo because XYZ, I think, like you said, played it a bit too greedy.
And another issue that XYZ has is Alvar is collecting, and he's going to be able to draw cards, which gives him access to Cypher's Wrath, Flame Bursts, all these great removal tools, which can allow his smaller guys to take care of this Verdant Force. So no matter what this Verdant Force decides to hit, it will always be under the threat of follow-up removal, and that is a big deal right now.
It does clear. Runin's probably going to dash onto that mountain. I mean, again, you're just not in a position where anything is that good as the follow-up here. I mean, Cypher could clear that Verdant Force right now, and it gets exactly what it gets exactly the same amount of life as the damage that it takes. Cypher's Wrath is another really good pickup, but I don't even know if you use that onto the Verdant Force or if you just kill it with Cypher here.
I like Cypher's Wrath here because then you can move your Axe Grinder down 1 slot. You can then move your Cypher down 1, and then you can shimmy your Horsemaster in front of the Runin on that mountain. So it blocks the Runin from having any influence on the Cypher. And then Cypher is almost free to win the game next turn.
Yeah, that's going to be 5 damage this turn if that's the way that Alvar chooses to play it, which does set Cypher up to be that lethal blow next turn, depending on what XYZ's follow-up is. But
Ooh,
even moving into moving into the middle seems worse than...
Oh, he's not using the Cypher's Wrath. Okay, that's fair. If you're not going to use the Cypher's Wrath, then you might as well just carry on. Oh, not going to take any... Not going to push any damage this turn, so I'm not sure if I like this line, because now it does open Cypher up to a Crystal Flower, but you do have a lot of forces going around, and Crystal Flower is probably going to be the only play, so maybe saying, alright, use your Crystal Flower, what else are you going to do? Clear one of my little guys? I'm just going to play more next turn.
Yeah, I guess Cypher, either way that you played that turn, still sets up a 1-hit lethal, and really nicely just surrounding Runin so it can't buff and get to Cypher here. But this is where you have to play the Crystal Flower then and hope. I'm still 8 damage this turn, and there's a Flame Burst as well, so that flower is going to be popped, although that does put Cypher in just a position where he's not really going to be able to do anything for the rest of the game here. So
the Cypher in that position also says, well, I'm never going to lose this game either, because once Cypher's out, he's going to kill anything that you play aggressively. So yeah, I think this is great. You just clear the Runin with the Flame Burst and the Brigand. Move the Horsemaster down, hit for free, then just play another Brigand in the middle. And then Runin comes down again, and you don't care.
Yeah, actually goes for the clear there instead with the Brigand instead of using the Flame Burst, so that keeps the Flame Burst in hand.
Yeah.
That'll almost guarantee that no matter what of these creatures either gets cleared, gets taunted, anything like that, that extra burst still exists in hand, and Alvar able to take the game.
Tying up the series 2-2. Bad matchup. Did take some time. But, Alvar was able to do it. Now the series is wide open. This mono green is eliminated. XYZ has 1 deck remaining. And it's going up against red combat control. One of the stronger decks in the meta. Green was the direct counter to that. And even red can win that matchup if you're not careful with your plays and how you play defensively. So let's see what XYZ's last deck is. And does it match up against this mono red?
Yeah, and based on what we've seen so far, it generally, or just throughout the course of the day, probably going to be a yellow, but a yellow looks more like Rush, actually seeing that Kaleem's follower in there. The demons don't necessarily lead towards Rush versus more of the tempo style, but this first land placement definitely will.
So yellow Rush is interesting against mono red. It very much depends what build you play. It also depends on your opponent's opening. I find that, because I've been playing so much Yellow Rush recently, I find that if my opponent opens a lot of Brigands and Bosses, the matchup can be pretty much unwinnable. Because they generate so much Faeria, they're able to react to you much easier. However, if you play a much more haste variant and they don't get those combat creatures, and you play 3 Zealous Crusaders, you can literally just sit back, get those cheeky hits in, throughout the course of a match, and then just drop 1 massive Zealous Crusader. They invest a lot of resources into that, and then you drop the second, and it's usually GG from there.
Yeah, and even just the fact that Yellow Rush has come back into the meta quite a bit more is why we've seen some of these red combat control players bringing Grim Guards in, so you can have that burn damage from afar, and then you maybe only need to get 1 creature with a Horsemaster straight down the middle. You just need that 1 aggressive creature because you've already burned them down a little bit. But like you said, really nice start here from Alvar, getting these early Brigands. He has the Gift of Steels to reinforce. It's going to be difficult for XYZ to clear everything in the way that he needs.
Yeah, he can't even Demon Wrangler this turn because he'll lose out in value because a 2/1 will get answered. There is a Zealous Crusader, so that's going to be very helpful. And these demons are going to go a long way. But there is double Gift of Steel. That is brutal. That means both of them live and get additional value because they're going to require either Wind Soldiers or Soul Drains. And if these get Wind Soldiered, you're a happy player if you're playing red because you're going to gain additional Faeria. So this is a fantastic response from Alvar.
I think I actually would have liked to have seen the Bomb Slinger come down rather than the second Gift of Steel there from XYZ. But I don't really think it matters. Like, the 5/1s in this situation are so difficult to deal with as well. So we're going to see, looks like double Demon Wrangler. Sagittarius should come down as well, I would expect. Yeah, and it does.
I think I know whose build this is. I developed this build to counter, well, not directly counter, but to help against red combat. I feel like Yellow Rush is in a good spot right now with Mono Green because Zealous Crusaders are such a pain, especially if Voice of Truth isn't run in a mass. You can run 1 or 2, but there's 3 Zealous Crusaders, and it can be a big problem. And when you run the Saggy build, it gives you some really interesting play styles against red control because you can basically just win off the back of Zealous Crusaders. So this is definitely not over for XYZ. If this Saggy can stick around, maybe get some cheeky hits off, that Zealous Crusader could become a problem.
Yeah, except the problem here is that Ground Shaker is going to take quite a while for the Sagittarius to punch through. Really nicely. Really nicely done by Alvar to trade the correct Underground Brigand there, so that the one on the right survives out of range of being hit from the Sagittarius there, instead of the one directly in front. So this is where we need to see Alvar push some lands up the board and either Bomb Slinger or just get another creature down next to the Sagittarius next turn.
Bomb Slinger has kind of missed its window in a way because Bomb Slingers are just perfect answers to Shaitan Demons. When Bomb Slingers come down and clear small haste guys, you don't get the value that you'd want. But this matchup definitely comes down to, does the red combat player draw the Faeria generating combat creatures? If they do, they're in a very good position to win because you gain so much Faeria, it's very hard for yellow to match the resources of them. And they're able to draw more cards and play more reactively. And this becomes a huge issue for Yellow Rush to deal with.
Yeah, that's kind of another, like, the red combat control here has so many tools to deal with all of these creatures. You have your little removal of the Flame Burst, Cypher's Wrath. Even the Ground Shaker can pick up a lot of value onto things like the Orodrim Monk, the Kalim's Follower, and then Bomb Slinger picks up the bigger creatures. And even at this point, Zealous Crusader is a 5/5, very easily dies to the Ground Shaker or the Cypher here, just out of range of the Bomb Slinger, but it's looking very, very good position for Alvar at this stage because he's able to get so many of these early tools.
I mean, this is XYZ's tournament life on the line. I do feel that from playing this deck a lot and playing this matchup a lot, if this was ladder right now, I would actually just surrender as a Yellow Rush player. There's just no way you get through this. It depends if there's some good tech choices, maybe a Last Nightmare. But you need to generate the Faeria in order to play that, and there's just no real opportunity to do that while Alvar just sits there, just blocking all the avenues for attack. This deck heavily relies on hitting your opponent's orb, generating big Crusaders, generating Faeria and card advantage through Salmons and Prayers, and Alvar's not giving XYZ that opportunity.
Yeah, a bit of an awkward spot here because Alvar takes the inefficient trade of the Bomb Slinger and using the Flame Burst there to clear off, make sure he doesn't allow XYZ to have any creatures stay on the board. But that does open him up to this line of XYZ continuing to push this little bit of damage wherever he can find it.
It is building up these Zealous Crusaders. They will become a little bit of a problem, but not a problem, not as much of a problem to win the game. It's more of a, oh, this is an 8/8 Crusader, I might have to throw a Flame Burst at this, how unfortunate, rather than, oh man, this is an 11/11 Crusader, how on earth am I going to deal with this? They're the two differences. That's a scale in Zealous Crusader in this matchup, and right now, it's kind of the smaller scale. He's going to get a saggy hit off, which is quite nice. Going to be able to cycle this prey, play a monk to follow up. Oh, does he wait now? Prey under prey, you can monk next turn, get more value. Where's this Zealous at? He's a 7/7, still not in a threatening range yet.
He's going to +1 to the Zealous, which is, I think, quite greedy in this situation of hoping that your opponent doesn't have the extra bit of clear onto the Crusader here, but I guess does open up. You're still looking at your opponent's creatures to die in that trade, so then you still have your lines open to attack with your haste creatures, but in this situation it is just clear the Crusader, even clear the Sagittarius. You continue to push orb damage. Unfortunately, can't. Oh, could get to the Ground Shaker if he decides to, but doesn't step the Cypher over the right way.
I'm curious of why he didn't move onto the desert in the middle. I guess 2 Saggies have been used, so that was... there probably aren't any more Saggies left, in all honesty, but just covering that desert could have been quite important.
Yeah, and actually now would have been quite important. The Flash Salmon could clear it there. I guess he could have had the charge from the other desert as well, but... There's another big Crusader. It's now an 8/8, which will be just out of range of Cypher here.
I needed that extra Faeria. If there was one more Faeria, this game could go... Oh, well, I don't know. The monk is fine here. So an 8/8 Crusader could be what's needed to win this match. But it's going to be very tough because the Ground Shaker is going to come down now. You could even just Cypher... Yeah, you could just hit the follower with the Cypher, gain that +1 life, and then play an aggressive Ground Shaker, or just play the aggressive Brigand.
It would have been really nice if that Brigand had come down first instead, because then you could have gone +1 Ground Shaker and the Brigand on that turn. In this situation, Cypher needs that little bit extra to deal with the Crusader right now, but I mean, he's still at 12 life. You're still healthy enough that an 8/8 Crusader isn't game over.
Yeah, there's not enough damage that's being dealt. You really need to make a lot of early hits with the haste creatures. It's a key component of the deck, and there's actually a very specific playstyle you can play against red control if you draw Flash Salmon in the early game, because you can actually go Desert, Explore, Desert, and then just use Flash Salmons to chip at them from far while you're developing land, and then when you do play a Zealous Crusader, it's already of a reasonable size, but... A little sad to see my deck didn't win that one. That matchup is very... It's 50-50. It can go either way, but... Yeah, Alvar taking the win there, and ultimately, unfortunately, I think if it comes down to XYZ's mono green versus mono red matchup.
Yeah, I mean, that was a lot of different lines that we discussed over the course of it. I think even in that yellow rush, like you said, there's situations where your hand can get bogged down as the red player. You get kind of all your Gift of Steels, maybe your Ground Shakers, and you've been locked out of collecting Faeria. You can't play them. And if you get that Crusader stacking as the yellow rush, you can take that game. But there was probably a couple other lines like we were talking about that XYZ could have put himself in better positions in the other games as well. But I mean, you never know what is going through the player's mind of long-term plays that they're setting up. So as much as we can see one line, they're maybe seeing something that's completely different that they think is the better way to go in that situation.
I think the red combat had that game just based on the draws alone. You know, the double Brigand was massive. The double Gift of Steel to kill the 2 Shaitans was huge as well. Even though 2 Bomb Slingers came up back to back, the fact that you could clear 2 of them and keep the Brigands alive meant that the Shaitans not only didn't get the push damage, but other resources had to be poured into those Brigands, which you don't want to do. You know, resource management is actually a big part of Yellow Rush in those very close matchups. You know, we see a lot of games where Yellow Rush just snowballs out of control, and it happens. You know, it's one of those decks that can just draw the nuts and it's going to win very easily. But in those matchups where it can't win very easily, resource management is just crucial to finding those victories.
Yeah, and I mean, even when you have your setup there, you generally, like we talked about in the opening game, seeing lose Green Rush, Rush decks generally go to their 2 lands and then just draw every single turn. Sometimes in Yellow Rush, you do need a 3rd desert to give you another attack angle. But because of all the creatures that Alvar got off the start there was just never an ability to get a third attack angle there from XYZ.
Yeah, the Zealous Crusaders had 0 impact. They were played for tempo, but I think it was more a tempo loss. I think XYZ's better line was just to sit back and try and defend for a little bit. He did defend with the Zealous Crusader. That was his only option. Again, I don't think the draws lined up very good there for XYZ to take the win. Alpha kind of drew the nuts in that matchup specifically and was able to answer with those double Brigands, double Gift of Steels. But that's going to be it. Alva moves on into the next round. We are going to take a look at the bracket here, guys. We have Zarakar and Alva going to be our semi-final featuring on this stream. Lu90, a Kahilian. The other semi-final is going to feature on the Korean stream. So if you'd like to see how Lu and Kahilian are progressing, be sure to check them out over on Gravekeeper's channel. We're going to go to a break before we set up the other match, and we'll be back as soon as possible. I just want to quickly touch base with the Eggbot. So the Eggbot, I believe now, is working. It is back in working order. Goki has probably been told off for messing around with it. You guys missed about an hour of Eggbot time, I believe. So when the stream ends, I will not be closing it down. I'll just be going to one of the other screens. It's going to be left up for an hour, so you guys can just chill in chat for an hour after the tournament and make sure you get at least a chance at those rewards. So don't worry about any missed time of the Eggbot. I got you guys covered. I've always got you guys covered. I always leave the stream up longer, so you know you guys are going to get exactly what you want. Anyway, we're going to go to a break, and we'll be back very soon with the first semi-final. Zarakar going up against Alva. Stay tuned.